as a session musician, you're playing the same song every night. Some of these songs I've been playing for years with the same band, should have known them inside out. And every night without fail, I would always make a tiny mistake in a different area of the song, and I couldn't predict when it was going to happen. So I brought it to my therapist and I said, what do you think? I've never been able to make any sense of this. And she just said, do you think it might be to do with an ADHD thing? And I was like, what do you mean?
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to ADHD Aha, the show where people share the moment when it finally clicked that they have ADHD. Now, I know that the term ADHD Aha can make it sound like it's always this sudden light bulb moment that comes out of nowhere, but I found that it's often more of a slow burn, life experiences that add up and converge over time into an aha. That's the case for my guest today, therapist and musician John Garden, and I'm excited for you to hear his story. Welcome, John. Thanks for being here today.
Hi. Thank you for having me.
I mentioned in the intro that, you're both a musician and a therapist, and I know that you've had experiences in both of your professions that have kind of led to you realizing that maybe you had ADHD.
Yes, I was a musician for about 20 years, and then I retrained as a psychotherapist in 2019. The kind of aha moment for me is to do with being a musician, though. I'd done a lot of work in therapy on the usual stuff to do with family and trauma, kind of big narrative events. And I thought there was a lot that always bothered me about how I was a musician, how I felt about being a musician. And so I thought it'd be interesting, now I've kind of cleared away a lot of the big stuff in therapy, to look at some of those things that have bugged me for my whole life. We've been working together for quite a few years now. And it's like almost the last thing on the list that I got to. And I came in one day and we'd been talking about how a client of mine who has an ADHD diagnosis, they were talking about, I quit this job because it was too boring, or I rage quit this job because the manager was treating people badly. And this kind of really checkered kind of history of work that I completely identified with. And I was just mentioned it to my therapist, and she said, oh, it's interesting. And then the next week I came in and I said, right, here's this thing that's really low on the list that I've always wanted to look at. As a performer, a lot of the time when I was working in as a session musician in kind of pop music, you're playing the same song every night, but you want to play it the same way almost every night. And some of these songs I've been playing for years with the same band and should have known them inside out. And every night without fail, I would always make a tiny mistake in a different area of the song, and I couldn't predict when it was going to happen. It always upset me because I just thought, I know I could be that musician that just plays the thing flawlessly, because I'm being paid to do a job. I'm not the front man, I'm the session guy. I never understood why it happened. And so I brought it to my therapist and I said, what do you think? I've never been able to make any sense of this. And she just said, do you think it might be to do with an ADHD thing? Mm. And I was like, what do you mean? And she said, well, it's inattention to detail, right? It's distraction.
Can you explain what a session musician is briefly?
It's otherwise known as a sideman. So, like, you're not a member of the band. You're paid to come and play and not make mistakes.
Yeah.
I mean, a classic one would be like, Kylie Minogue she's the artist, and then she has a band, and they're all session musicians. And then some bands will be a 4-piece band, and they'll hire a horn section as extra musicians. So that's a session musician.
Were you feeling bored by playing the same songs over and over again? Do you think that was part of the inattention to detail?
I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah. So the drummer that I worked with for a long time, he became a really good friend. We would play a game called Chase the Click, where you're playing to a click track. So the tempo's the same for the whole song. And to combat the boredom, we would have 3 signals. One was to play ahead of the click a little bit. One was to play behind the click a little bit. And the other one was to play on the click. So, and then that was hide the click, so that you were so in time with the click you couldn't hear it. And that's how we stayed interested
Well, as a non-musician, I'm not exactly sure what you mean, but I get the principle. I get the idea of what you're saying.
You're just playing the whole song slightly faster than you should, and then slightly slower than you should, and then playing it exactly right. That's how well we knew the material.
So just like bringing in some novelty, right? Yeah, it's so interesting because for folks who, aren't musicians or who have never performed on stage, one would think that, oh, this is the perfect ADHD job. You're on stage, you're in front of people, you're moving, there is excitement. So you would imagine that there's this novelty all the time. But it's interesting, like in any type of job, it can get so rote and repetitive that someone with ADHD can really struggle with that.
I think you're right. I guess if you're more on the front of the stage and you have more of that interaction with the audience, it's going to feel much more different every night, maybe. But I think the travel and being in a different town every day, working with a lot of different people, you've got local crew who are different every day. That really worked for me. On the one hand, it's very structured because you have to be in Rome on Tuesday and Berlin on Wednesday or whatever, like that almost like militarized organization. But also you can then go home and you're off work for 6 weeks and nothing happens, and then the phone rings and you've got to go to the airport. I can see now how that does work for an ADHD brain.
So you bring this experience to your therapist, but you had this other experience in your other job as a therapist, right? Where you really identified with this client was talking about rage quitting. Can you describe what rage quitting is?
The Bulldog Drummond character from Frasier when he goes, "This is total BS." Yeah. That's it. That's it, basically. And it's, the ADHD, huge emotional reaction to a very perceivably small kind of slight or injustice.
Yeah.
And I've seen myself do it before I started really touring, and I used to do lots of bar work, as you do.
Wait, bar work, like as a bartender?
Yeah. Yeah. And actually, interestingly, I was really good at that because you're meeting new people every day. It's always different. It's like immediate.
Oh yeah.
One of the things about performing and bar work that really worked for me was the immediate feedback. So I'm going to go off on a tangent, but when I stopped touring,
I love it, and
relevant to the podcast to go off on a tangent. I started doing mixing records for people. What happens is someone sends you a song or 3 songs or an album, whatever. You mix it, you send it back to them, and then nothing happens. And you feel like your career's over, they hate you, everything's awful. And then a week later they go, "Oh, sorry, I've been a bit busy. I love it, it's great, brilliant, don't change anything." It took me a long time to realize what's going on here is that I'm not in front of an audience who are going, "Yeah, great, well done." And like in bar work, you've got somebody going, "Thank you very much for my drink." And also they leave at the end of the night and they're happy.
I was a waitress all through college and into in my mid-20s, and I loved it. It really suited me. I really, really enjoyed it. Okay, so rage quitting.
I have rage quit. Yeah, just something came to mind that I'd gone to visit family for the weekend, and I was driving back to where I was working in 2 separate bars, and I took a wrong turn and ended up heading back in the wrong direction. And then I pulled over and looked at the map, and I was like, oh. And I just remember having such a huge reaction to it that I called into work, and I was like, "I don't think I'm going to be in this week. Not even today." I was like, "I don't even think I'm going to be able to recover from this." And it was really, really freaked me out. But on tour, what's interesting is it's a big deal to rage quit because you then have to book your own flight home. I'm often on another continent. And I remember starting one tour. So I live in the UK. And it started on the East Coast of America. And the first day we got there, this new person showed up and said, "Oh, hi, I'm the tour accountant." And we were like, didn't know anything about you. And he was a nice guy. There was nothing wrong with him as a person. But what he wanted to do essentially was like shave off some dollars and cents on the tour budget. And it was all not anything that we'd agreed or negotiated before leaving home. And it tickled that kind of justice sensitivity part of my brain because it felt very unfair, and I just didn't engage with it at all. And I was the only person in the kind of touring party that was just like, "No, whatever you guys decide is what you decide, but I can't be involved in this." And I remember calling a friend almost in tears, like so angry that this had happened, and thinking I could just get on a plane and go home. When I think about it now, it's like, realistically, it was just a money-saving exercise, and it's just the industry changed a lot, over the time that I worked in it.
How did people react to you?
I think they knew me. They knew that was what I did. I did it on another tour where we had somebody who was in a managerial kind of position, and they were treating the musicians in a way that I didn't like. And I wrote this huge email to the record label complaining about this person. And again, kind of almost like wrote myself out of the job, because it turned out that the person I was complaining about was friends with the person that ran the record label. So they shared my email. But I think it was just this, everybody around me was seeing me explode, and they all agreed with me, but they're like, yeah, but you could write that email, because they knew I would. So, yeah.
I've done so many things like what you just mentioned. I don't think I've actually rage quit, but I've like just the impulsivity out of frustration and not putting the brakes on things that I'm really embarrassed about. I think it's just really helpful to speak them out loud for our listeners so that they know that it's part of it,
And I think when you feel that embarrassed, it becomes very private, so it's hard to share. So then it just kind of gets stuck.
Mm-hmm. Is that part of the reason that it was last on your list with your therapist?
Do you know what? The making little mistakes thing, mainly as a pianist, I think I've had since I started when I was like 11, 12 years old. And I always felt embarrassed about it. It always felt shameful that I couldn't absolutely get it right ever. And in a way, I kind of developed a style of playing that a little bit Elton John kind of, like honky tonky kind of, sounds a little bit fumbled, like stylish kind of stylish, woolly kind of way of playing, as my kind of house style, right? It almost was to cover up the fact that I wasn't that neat and tidy in the way that I played. Yeah, so I suppose that's maybe why it felt like I'll get to that eventually.
So how did you feel when the therapist said, have you thought about ADHD? What was your immediate reaction?
A friend had said it to me maybe the year before and had just floated it as an idea. Like, you might be ADHD. And I didn't know enough about it then in terms of what it meant for me to kind of really let it sink in. And when my therapist said it, I was like, oh, there's that suggestion again. Initially, I was like, I don't recognize that in myself, because I feel like I kind of get along okay with life. But then when I kind of really just laid out the traits and looked at them one by one, I could see, oh, no, yeah, okay. A lot of it does fit. What doesn't really, well, because I have been diagnosed with inattentive type. Mm-hmm. I was going to say the hyperactivity doesn't fit me, but when I'm on a kind of, those days when I will get everything done, I do look hyperactive.
How so?
I would just get, excuse my language, I would just get shit done. I'll do like 5 days worth of tasks in one day. Like my house will be a tip for 5 days, and then on the 6th day, I'll not only tidy it, but I'll be putting up shelves or whatever, or it kind of looks like that.
What were some of those things on the list of ADHD behaviors? What resonated with you the most?
Well, inattention to detail is what we've just been talking about.
Right, of course, yeah.
Big emotional reactions. Justice sensitivity, the big emotional reactions come in with that. The hyperfocus, hyperfixation, definitely. Mm-hmm. Time blindness, for sure. I think I said to you the other day, like my house looks like Doc Brown's house in Back to the Future. There's clocks on every surface. If I turn around in the morning and there isn't a clock in front of me, I kind of panic, and I'm like, I'm not quite sure how much time's just elapsed.
Obviously, you weren't diagnosed until you were an adult, and we never actually said when you were diagnosed, but I think it was in the last year or so. Is that right?
Last summer.
Yeah. So this is relatively new. Have you done any reflecting on, I know you're a therapist and you have been in therapy for a while, so I imagine the answer is yes, but as a child, Yeah, sorry. That sounded like it was shade, but it's not. It's respect.
You may be a reflective person. I don't know.
But have you like reflections of you as a child with undiagnosed ADHD?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
The classic story about me, age 5, moving to a new school after a divorce, so maybe I'm a little bit unsettled. Had to write some story in the morning, which I obviously didn't want to do because I wasn't interested in it. And they said, "Oh, well, that's all right, John. You can stay at your desk until the end of lunchtime, until you've finished the story, and then you can hand it in, put it in your tray, the little tray where you put your work, and then you can go and have your lunch." And I sat there for the whole of lunchtime, and right at the end of lunchtime, I put the story in my tray, and they went, "Well done, John. See? Wasn't so difficult, was it?" And they opened the tray and they took out the story, and the story said, "I will not write this story."
That's kind of badass.
That's the beginning of my school career, and it kind of carried on like that. And then my secondary school, I would essentially just every day was like, "I'm sorry, I forgot. I'm sorry, I forgot to do that homework," or "I don't have my book," or "I don't have my PE kit," and just consistently. I was on report, which is a kind of like, the thing before they suspend you and ask you to not come to school is like on report. So I was just consistently on report, and not because I was naughty, but because I just wasn't doing what they wanted me to do.
Yeah.
And then I started doing my exams and having to hand in essays and things as you get older. I remember I just would do nothing, and the night before I'd be like, "Oh, I suppose I should do that English essay," and do it, hand it in, get an A grade. And to the point where people will come to me the morning that the thing was due and say, "Can we see so that we can get some some of what you've done?" Because they knew I was going to get a high mark, but I wouldn't do any other work.
Did teachers and others, did they think that that was like willful behavior, laziness? And what was the reality?
I guess they viewed it as me being useless, probably.
Useless is such a strong word. How did that experience as a kid affect your self-esteem as you got older?
Yeah, there's something about those kind of recurring scripts about ourselves, not to sound like a therapist, sorry, that it's like, "Oh yeah, that's me, that's what I do, that's the thing that they said that about me at school, so I'm just doing that again." That feels true. To be fair, my experience of school was that I always remembered that each teacher treated me differently because of you have a different relationship with each teacher. And I think as I got older, I started to enjoy working with teachers who saw me and kind of got me a bit more. And other teachers, you just like give up on the relationship with each other because they're never going to understand where you're coming from and you don't see eye to eye. I remember there was a biology teacher called Mr. Hammett who was really well liked. And I really liked his lessons because I sat right at the front and he was really energetic, but so structured and ordered, and he knew his subject inside out. And he would do worksheets on, like, I remember we did a lesson on genetics. He would make a worksheet about a pupil in the class and like make up a kind of disease based on their name and say, well, if they have kids, then their kids are going to have a 50% chance of inheriting this. And it was really just like brilliant teaching. But what I think I responded to was the structure, the depth of knowledge, and the fact that he knew who I was. So he knew that I was going to lose attention really quickly if I was bored. So he kept everything super interesting, not just for me, but that's why it worked for me. Maybe that carried on after school, that other people that influenced me were the people who knew what they were doing inside out, who were really, really impressive and had a kind of real depth of knowledge. And I just would latch onto it. So as a musician, I would go to jam sessions and there was someone there and I would just be like, "You're great. Can I come and hang out with you at your house tomorrow and just ask you questions?" And they'd be like, "Yeah, sure." And I would just literally like sit at people's feet and just kind of just absorb their knowledge. But normal learning, no, couldn't do that.
You know, so many of us with ADHD can feel like failures. we grew up feeling like failures because, especially if we weren't diagnosed and people didn't know what was going on with us, that it just seemed like you used the word useless before. So I find it interesting that you sought out people who you viewed as the best at what they did.
I think, yes, definitely. It felt like, how am I gonna be an adult? Not knowing what it was, but just that sense of like, there's a part of me that always seems to be useless and not to do things the proper way. And how is this going to work? The time in my 20s doing bar work, not being very focused, knowing that I wanted to be a musician, but again, going to college and dropping out of college because I wasn't a very good student, but I was DJing every night and going to jam sessions, which is great for being a musician, but not great for being a university student, and kind of bumbling through my 20s. And then a saying that I absolutely detest is finding your tribe. I cannot stand that, but the experience of it is really powerful. And finding people in my mid to late 20s who saw me and got me and understood that I was a kind of musician they could work with was incredible, because it feels for so long like the world doesn't make sense and you're falling through the cracks, and I don't do things the way that everybody else does things.
John, when we last connected, you mentioned that your ADHD diagnosis was life-changing for you. Describe why. Why was it life-changing for you?
One of the themes of my personal therapy is like personal integration, which is like this ongoing project for me about on lots of different layers and levels. One of them is like, I'm a musician and I'm a therapist, and I kind of kept them separate for a while. Even sitting talking to you now is like, how am I bringing those parts of myself together and integrating them into me, and the me that's always been there, that I've always been me, and there has always been that kind of interest in philosophy and helping people from being a child as much as music, and the ADHD part is the other part that's being integrated now, right? And so how do I see that part of myself that's ADHD initially as like a separate bubble that's like, oh, there's the new view of me. And then the work is, I want to bring that into the rest of me so that it feels integrated and blended into all of the other stuff. I think the reason it's kind of felt life-changing was because a lot of the suffering that has come about from not being diagnosed is because it makes me feel so bad about myself because of the way that I exist in the world as a person who's neurodivergent in a majority neurotypical world, right? So that creates an emotional suffering for me that I didn't understand. And then a lot of the time it was like, it must be me, it's my fault. So the life-changing aspect of it is that I can look at it and go, it's actually a mismatch between me and the world and the people in the world who are not like me. Then when I have the justice sensitivity or the hyperfocus that people don't understand, or the inattention to detail, or the task paralysis, or the executive dysfunction, or whatever those things are, I can notice those negative feelings and kind of reframe them a bit more, where it's not my fault. It's not because I'm useless. And I think that's the big change.
That's so beautiful. Thank you for listening to the show, and just thank you for the work that you're doing and for your candor.
It's a pleasure. Thank you. And I just want to say, if it's all right, that there's a lot of podcasts out there, but your podcast in particular, in terms of neurodivergence, really strikes me as like, it's sane, it's balanced, it's sober. And I really like that. And I really appreciate the depth of your interviews as well.
That means so much to me. Thank you so much, John.